Yesterday, after talks in Berlin, a European-led but US-supported multinational force Ukraine was proposed, as was an American commitment to offer guarantees to Ukraine similar to what it would get under NATO's Article 5. Ukraine and its EU allies welcomed these commitments, but will Mr. Trump stand by them? Douglas Rediker is a non-resident senior fellow, Foreign Policy, Global Economy and Development, at the Center on the United States and Europe at the Brookings Institute in Washington. Good morning, Douglas.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Mr. Trump sounded unusually optimistic about the latest Ukraine talks, or unusually optimistic for the world. He said, "I think we're closer now than we have been ever." Do you believe him?
Well, I'm going to take issue with the way you framed the impediment. I think anytime you see, and this is one of those instances, anytime you see where the Europeans, the UK, the Ukrainians, and a U.S. negotiating team come up with an agreed position, you can be pretty sure Vladimir Putin is going to be on the other side of that. So given that Donald Trump has sort of swung one way or the other, depending on who he's talking to and who's most convincing in the most recent conversation, in this case, yes, I think it's a good sign that this week you had some fairly strong agreement between the parties I just mentioned. But every signal we're seeing out of the Kremlin is that they will not accept it. So I'm not sure phrasing this week's moves as all to be blamed on Donald Trump would be appropriate. I think you could do that in the past. But this week, I think the onus is going to be on the Russians, and I don't think they're going to accept what's being proposed.
Is there any prospect that this may not be the agreement? It may not even really be the platform for the agreement. But is there a sort of dynamic going on that means that we might be moving in some way, shape or form to a cessation of hostilities?
Well, hope springs eternal, and these things aren't going to go on forever. So at some point, there will be some cessation of hostilities one way or the other. I think that you had a 28-point plan that started, as far as we can tell, by the Russians for putting most of those provisions together and then sending it to the Americans and allowing the Americans to make it seem as if it was theirs. The 28-point plan, which was unacceptable to Ukraine and Europe, suddenly became a 20-point plan, which is the framework on which they were discussing this past week. They are working off of a common starting point. I guess that's progress. But you still do not have agreement on security guarantees, on territorial concessions, and on what the Kremlin calls the ultimate Russian goals. And those goals are basically to force Ukraine to give up its independence and sovereignty. I don't think we're much closer on those points. So until you resolve the big points, the fact that you're working off a single starting point is progress, but not enough progress to reach a ceasefire.
The Americans are pretty clear that there are never going to be American boots on the ground in Ukraine, but they talk about monitoring a ceasefire, and this word deconflict has started to appear. What do you think they really mean here?
I don't take any of these words at face value anymore. I mean, I think, as you said in your introduction, there's now talk coming out of this week of a U.S. Article 5 NATO-style security guarantee, which was even discussed to go through the Senate and or the Congress. That would mean treaty-like commitments. If you've got a treaty-like commitment by the United States, authorized, ratified by the Senate or both houses of Congress, then the idea that you're saying, but there won't be boots on the ground is kind of inconsistent with that. So until you resolve that sort of thing where you're giving a NATO-style guarantee, but you're saying, but we won't put boots on the ground, those two are inconsistent. So I'm not sure any of this actually is what meets the eye, and it's going to evolve. I don't think that the U.S. negotiators were speaking with the full authority to actually make that so-called commitment that that the U.S. would give a security guarantee ratified by the Senate. So I think, as I said before, territory security and the ultimate goal and Ukraine's independence are still completely unresolved.
My impression has been all along that from the White House's point of view, this conflict is secondary. they still see the Indo-Pacific, that is to say China, as their principal area of geopolitical concern. And what they really just want to do is get this off the table. Is there a danger here that if this isn't resolved, that they get it off the table simply by saying, you know what, Europe, it's your problem. Give us a call when you've got it sorted?
Yes, but again, the pivot to Asia is something that goes back decades. I mean, I remember when Bill Clinton said they were going to do a pivot to Asia, and then the Middle East became much more of a central issue for that administration. We've had successive administrations that have claimed that pivot to Asia is their highest priority. This one is no different. I guess this one is different only in that it speaks with multiple voices. You have people in the Defense Department that are espousing the view that you said. There are others that are actually looking at this as more existential on a geopolitical basis. But I think you've got to really hone in on President Trump's own personal ambitions. He made a promise during the campaign multiple times he was going to resolve this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Even said this was going to be the easiest one he would resolve and would resolve it on day one or before day one. Now, none of that has come to pass. So I think there's a certain element of his own credibility, for what that's worth, being on the table, and also his own aspirations for a Nobel Peace Prize. I know that sounds somewhat trite, but that legitimately is one of his motivations. But I do think that where you ended is completely plausible, which is that at a certain point in time, regardless of the fact that the blame lies squarely with Vladimir Putin and Russia in this case, that Trump could just walk away. That is clearly on the table. It's something that we have worried about from day one. I think the real question is, what does walking away mean? Does it mean walking away and not allowing U.S. weapons to be provided, even if they're paid for by Europe and others? Does it mean providing intelligence services which help those weapons actually function? Or does it mean a complete withdrawal and walk away? We don't know what it would look like, but clearly Trump being Trump, anything is possible.
I'm mildly despondent to hear that the fact that Mr. Trump got the FIFA World Cup Peace Prize wasn't quite enough for him, and he still wants a Nobel Prize. But let's leave that to one side. And I just ask you quickly one final question. Venezuela, an area in which I'm very interested. Mr. Trump has, in the last 24 hours, ordered what he calls a total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers going into and out of Venezuela. How serious is it that likely that there would be some real hot conflict there?
Well, tragically, I think the answer is it's much more serious than it should be. I think that President Trump started by talking about this being an anti-drug, I don't even know what you call it, operation, I guess, in which we're attacking fishing boats or drug running boats, whatever they may be. And now we've seized a tanker, but he has increasingly become exposed to the idea that if Maduro stays in Venezuela, Maduro is perceived as winning and Trump is perceived as losing. And Trump doesn't like to be perceived as a loser. So given the amount of military hardware that we put into the region, and given that binary win or lose scenario for Trump, I think it is more likely than not that there will be some military action. Whether that results in Maduro leaving or not remains an open question.
Okay.
And even more important, if Maduro leaves, what comes next?
Douglas Rediker, non-resident senior fellow, foreign policy, global economy and development, the Centre on United States and Europe at the Brookings Institute. Thank you so much for your time today.